Hey everyone, it is September the 3rd, and if you didn't already know, it is hurricane season, and the Atlantic is starting to remember that it's hurricane season, as we have several things to talk about, several tropical storms, named storms now, two named storms in the Atlantic, both of which could affect the United States, and yes, that includes Florence, and I will talk about Florence in a bit. But I'll first start by talking about Tropical Storm Gordon, which was named overnight. Last night became a tropical depression. Well, actually became a potential tropical cyclone last night at some point. And then overnight is already named to Gordon. It's intensifying pretty quickly. So the center of it, this is a visible satellite image as of not too long ago. And the center of it is approximately right here, right now, just southwest of Fort Myers, Florida, and moving to the northwest. Actually, it's probably going to be a little more moving to the northwest. Lots of rain bands over Florida right now, even as far north as Georgia, into southeast Alabama at the moment, with Gordon here, and it's intensifying now over the Gulf of Mexico. Warmer sea surface temperatures, wind shear has decreased, so I expect it to become a borderline hurricane, possibly even a hurricane, as it a Category 1 hurricane as it approaches the Gulf Coast, mostly from southeast Louisiana up through the Alabama coast. By tomorrow night into, I guess tomorrow and tomorrow night mostly, and then possibly a little bit into Wednesday as well. But by Wednesday it should be inland by Wednesday. So as a result, National Weather Service, let me see if I can find it here. I'll refresh this just to make sure nothing else has been added recently. I think they're not going to add it until 4 or 5 Eastern today. So Tropical Storm Gordon, the center of it, off the Florida coast here, expected to move northwest. Tropical storm warnings are in effect for South Florida, south of Fort Myers, Florida Keys, all the way to the southeast side of Florida in Miami. And tropical storm warnings also from central Louisiana coast all the way up through the Florida Panhandle, the western Florida Panhandle, with hurricane watches actually in this area as well, a little smaller area, I believe, of hurricane watches. It's hard to see on this image, but the hurricane watches are what's in pink, so pretty much from eastern Louisiana up through the Alabama-Florida border, currently hurricane watches as Gordon moves to the northwest, and it's moving pretty quickly, so it's going to make landfall. This is 8 p.m. Tuesday, just off the coast of Mississippi. I think some of the models move a little further to the south, to near the Mississippi River Delta, mouth of Mississippi, but in general, it's going to be in this area between southeast Mississippi and Alabama coast, when it makes landfall as probably a high-end tropical storm or a Category 1 hurricane tomorrow night. So anyone in this area, be prepared for Gordon, and tomorrow night. So it'll be pretty soon, not much time to prepare. This is projected rainfall from the National Hurricane Center from Gordon. So 2 to 4 inches for South Florida, even some possible higher amounts. On the Gulf Coast, 2 to 4 inches all the way inland, in the green areas. In the yellow areas, 4 to 6, and then National Hurricane Center even has this little area in northern Louisiana of 6 to 10 inches. So lots of rainfall, heavy rainfall coming with Gordon as it moves ashore. Especially on the east side here from approximately New Orleans east to the Florida Panhandle, possibly also risk of some tornadoes tomorrow night, mostly tomorrow night, but possibly tomorrow during day too. As Gordon comes ashore, also parts of Mississippi and Alabama, as well as that moves inland, eastern Louisiana with Gordon. So that's what's happening currently with Gordon. It was a quick former. It formed quickly. The European model was pretty consistent and adamant about it forming, while most other models, including GFS, kept it as a weak tropical wave. And guess which model won? The European model won that. The contest of of the strength of this tropical wave. Obviously, it's now a tropical storm and expected to become a hurricane too as well. Let's look at the current radar image over Florida. This is the current radar image over Florida. Again, the center. Refresh this just to make sure you have an up-to-date image. And the center is, as I said, close to Fort Myers. Fort Myers here, so the center, you can see the rotation in the center right here, offshore, southwest of Fort Myers, and then you see all the rain bands with thunderstorms moving across Florida. And I only have a Florida image. I can't really see Georgia and Alabama, but definitely thunderstorms coming up here as well, which some of these are not directly associated with Gordon quite yet, but they're also, obviously, Gordon is bringing lots of tropical moisture ashore, so we'll move this way, and heavy rain coming for the Gulf Coast tomorrow into Wednesday. All right, let's see what else do I have for Gordon. That's a visible satellite. This is a high resolution image of Gordon as well. So pretty much the same as you saw with the visible. Here's the coast of Florida. Here it's kind of hard to see underneath Gordon, but this center Gordon just off the coast of southwest Florida and bringing all these rain bands into Florida at the moment, and we'll head toward the Gulf Coast tomorrow. All right. So that's just a really brief update on Gordon. Here's the Atlantic Ocean as a whole. Satellite image. Here's Gordon. You can see it in the later images. You can see how quickly it formed and strengthened south as it moved just south of Florida through the Florida Keys and now just offshore southwest Florida today. So it's strengthening pretty quickly. So that's Gordon. We have Florence here, which I talked about, and that's right here, moving westward through the Atlantic. And now there's a lot of question about whether Florence will approach the United States, and I'm going to focus some time on talking about that because there are now two kind of camps and models. Florence recurving or Florence kind of heading west and then recurving. I guess it's more than one camp. Or Florida heading toward either the Carolinas or possibly even into Florida, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We have we have a next tropical wave starting to come off of Africa now, Western Africa, that could also develop into the next into something. This is that one that I talked about last week, emerging from Africa Monday, Tuesday. It's currently Monday, so it's emerging off of Africa. I talked about another wave that might come behind it for later this week, and we'll look at that briefly as well. The next two storms, by the way, would be named Helene and Isaac are the next two names. So we could see both of those or one of those this week, depending on what happens with those two systems. So let's take a look at this National Hurricane Center webpage. So here's Gordon, Florence, and then here's the next wave coming off of Africa now. So look at Tropical Storm Florence. I showed you that. Here's the National Hurricane Center forecast track, official forecast track for Florence for the next 5 days. So it's sitting out here, approximately 38 degrees west longitude, and National Hurricane Center expecting it to become to remain a tropical storm throughout its 5 days. Kind of move northwest, curve, head toward Bermuda if you extrapolate that track. But there's a lot of error in this track this 5 days ahead. It can move south. It can move to the north part of this, according to the National Hurricane Center. And we'll talk a little bit about what it might do in the long term. There's a lot of uncertainty, though. So, still something to watch. I'm gonna start. Well, I was gonna start getting rid of these, but okay. That is. Sorry for switching windows so quickly. Let's look what the GFS model does to start with Florence. So here is the current time, basically. It's a little bit ago, but this was a forecast from this morning for approximately 2 hours ago. And GFS initial run, initial conditions forecast doesn't really has this weak, relatively weak wave where we now have actually a tropical storm. So Gordon here is actually stronger. So here's Gordon sitting in here. I can't even make those lines very well. But here's Tropical Storm Gordon sitting off the southwest coast of Florida, and it's going to be moving this way, and you'll see that as we animate it. This is Tropical Storm Florence here in the Atlantic. This is our next tropical wave here. So this is the GFS forecast of sea level pressure and precipitation, and this is an extratropical low, small extratropical low with some scattered thunderstorm activity. You might have seen that in the satellite images I'll go back to here, which we clear the annotations, but that's just kind of scattered thunderstorm activity, and I didn't even use the highlighter there, but you got the point. There. Okay. So let's go back to GFS model, and so there is Gordon over here making landfall in southeast Louisiana in the Mississippi coast. Florence over here, our next wave, trying to get a little organized here. And this is as of Tuesday. This is as of tomorrow. And I can't. I need to go up a little bit. Okay. All right. So going forward in time, this is what the GFS model does. Where it's lacking a few images that didn't get loaded. Here this is now Saturday morning. This is our next actually tropical wave coming off of Africa. Saturday morning. This is that first one that's coming off right now. GFS not developing them into much quite yet. And here's Florence. Gordon's long gone. Gordon actually. I wonder. Let me go back a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So this is. Back to this is the same one on Saturday morning. This is actually the kind of the remnants of Gordon that kind of merged with an extratropical low up to the north of Gordon. So Gordon's going to come this way and then basically get sheared off to the northeast up through Michigan. So that a post I made the other day about the European model indicating Gordon kind of hanging around Texas. And bringing heavier rainfall there. That's not going to happen. It was something that European was a little consistent about, but didn't have the other features exactly right over the U.S. So it was good on the intensity of Gordon, but not necessarily the track of Gordon. So anyway, Saturday morning here's Florence, and I will go forward from here. So GFS curving Florence. Basically taking Florence back out to sea here pretty quickly out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Here's the next tropical wave coming off Africa today, and then this one keeping those waves fairly weak. And now the really long term, this now is Sunday the 16th. Here are the remnants of Florida heading out to, already head out to sea now, heading toward Europe as an extratropical low. Here's actually the wave one of the tropical waves coming off this week. The GFS has it as a tropical depression or weak tropical storm moving toward the Caribbean by the 16th, and then not much more activity here. Some activity, but nothing organized here in the Atlantic. That's the GFS model. Okay. Now, let me kind of go back on the GFS model and outline where GFS is taking Florence. Okay? And I'll show you why I'm doing this in a second. Because I'll show you the big differences in what models are now doing with Florence, and we'll have to see why this is happening. So basically, GFS is doing this with Florence, and then taking it way out to sea toward Europe. All right, so that's GFS forecast of where Florence is going to go. All right, now let's look at the European model. All right, and this is where you start seeing, we get to start seeing the fun in forecasting. All right, so here's the European model. Florence basically in the same spot as of this morning. Okay, let's see, where does the European model take Florence? I'm going to go, hold on, I need to go back because I intentionally hit the wrong, I hit the down arrow instead of the right arrow. So, all right, there we go. Now, so it was going to two different European model runs as opposed to different times. So sorry about that. All right, let's go back to the European model now. All right, there we go. This makes a lot more sense. All right, so here's Gordon making landfall here, and now there's Gordon on the European. So European model keeps Gordon a little further south than the GFS does. Not a whole lot, but further south. And this is now by Friday. You see, it's a little further south than GFS. Weaker also because higher wind shear, cooler sea surface temperatures, keeping Florida a little bit weak, keeping Florence a little bit weaker there. Now we're going to go forward in time. Here's Sunday morning, and now Florence out here to the west of where the GFS has it. And also, I'll point out a few other things on this European model. Here's the remnants of Gordon right over Chicago on early Sunday morning as it may landfall and then curve this way. Here are the next two. So the European model wants to develop tropical wave coming off of Africa today and the one coming off of Africa a little later this week into the next two tropical storms, Helene and Isaac. So I wanted to point that out as well. But let's go forward in time and a little forward more and see what happens with Florence. Uh-oh. Wait a second. Florence is over here. GFS has it way over here. So now the European is taking Florence back west and strengthening Florence again by next Tuesday morning, and then Wednesday morning, and here's next Thursday morning. So the European model now has Florence just east of the coast of Georgia and Florida as what could be a strong hurricane. I don't know exactly what that central pressure is, but you can see lots of black lines, lots of colors, which are the measure of the vorticity of the rotation in the atmosphere. So the European now has Florence on this track in blue. The GFS has it on this track in red, curving way out to sea, heading toward Europe. Two completely different tracks. completely different tracks. So we got to see. So we have to see which one may be more accurate. And before I go on, I'll clear this here. And before I go on, I'll point out these are the next two, Helene and Isaac, that the European is also forecasting as they had moved across the. Okay, so these are the next waves as they move across the ocean. You might have noticed a little jump in the video. I had to take a phone call, so I had to pause the video. But these were the Helene and Isaac as the European forecast of them moving across the ocean here. And notice both of them are staying low, so staying south. So we're European, which is usually actually pretty good on forecasting hurricane tracks, seems to be maintaining a stronger ridge, a blocking ridge to the north than the GFS is, which, if that's the case, would be a little concerning for the southeast United States, because that would allow tropical systems to move that way, that direction. And this actually happened last year. Models were underestimating the strength of Atlantic Ridge, and a lot of the hurricane stayed south. One reason why Hurricane Irma last year, if you remember, some indications were that it was going to go north into the Carolinas, and it ended up staying south and curving into Florida. And there were a couple of systems that did that last year. So let's take a look at the differences in the upper air patterns pretty quickly here between the two. GFS model to start with. Here's Irma, and I talked about this a little bit in my last video, but here's our strong ridge over the Atlantic, a general ridge, blocking ridge to the north over the Atlantic Ocean. And as Irma moves west, the ridge the ridge basically weakens, so we have the strong parts of the ridge here on both sides, even I guess here to the west of this. And you notice actually the European model in my last video was holding this ridge a little further west than GFS. So now GFS is on board with this ridge this far west. So the European model tends to do pretty well on these. And then GFS is actually starting to rebuild this ridge south of Florence now by this coming Saturday. So I'm going to go back in time just slightly here so you don't be confused. But basically the middle part of the ridge gets weakened, partly by this trough coming in here into the Atlantic, and that allows Florence to recurve and then get picked up by this next trough and head over toward Europe. So describing this really quickly, because I'm seeing if I can finish this video here soon, because I have to get running. Unfortunately, I won't be able to talk about all the large-scale features out to the northwest, but I might be able to talk about that in a little bit, that are influencing how this ridge develops. But here's the European model. Here's the ridge over the east coast. There's the general big ridge over the Atlantic. And Florence weakens here. And this is actually a big difference, too. Okay? So Florence weakening on the European model versus Florence a little bit further northeast, a little bit stronger, or maybe even more than a little bit stronger on the GFS model over here, allows Florence to break down this ridge. So if Florence remains weak, which it looks like it might, actually, it doesn't, it won't have as much influence on weakening this ridge over the Atlantic. So the weaker Florence is here by later this week, the further south it can stay because of the less power it will have to weaken that ridge to the north. And that's pretty much exactly what the European is doing. It's not able to weaken that ridge enough. Florence is a bit weaker, and so even though the European weakens this, does have this trough up to the north, which does weaken this ridge a bit. Florence down here to the south is a little bit too far south to be connected to this trough. Let me see if I can go to the GFS value at the same time and kind of show you what I mean with the GFS. Okay, so here's the GFS now. And so the GFS has the same trough up to north as the European does. But Florence is further north and further east, is stronger, is able to basically, connect with the trough. Basically, the energy from Florence can be picked up by the energy from the trough, which can push it off to the north and east. While the European model keeps Florence far enough south of this trough that the energy with Florence in the atmosphere doesn't get picked up, doesn't get connected with this trough. And what that does is it allows this trough, take off those annotations, allows this trough to the north. Oh, come on. Trying to move in time and it's not moving. There you go. Which allows this trough on the European model here to keep moving off to the east with kind of leaving Florence behind here in the Atlantic. While on the GFS model, at the same time, right here, this trough is moving off to the east and is able to basically pick up Florence and move Florence off to the northeast. And that is early next week, about a week. This is actually a week from this morning on this forecast. So going back to the European model, now Florence is trapped underneath this ridge. This trough is long gone to the north, left Florence behind. Florence sitting out here, and this ridge from the east coast can build to the north of Florence, which could direct Florence west toward the southeast United States. While on the GFS model, at the same time, let me go look at the time, 192. So 192 hours from now, Florence is way off to the north, picked up by these troughs and heading east already. That first trough is already long gone to the east as well in Europe on the GFS, but with Florence already being picked up and steered a little bit to the northeast, it's sitting way up here, kind of hangs out here, still connected with the jet stream flow off to the north, and then when this next low comes on the GFS, it gets picked up, it gets taken off to the east for a ride on the next trough. So, in short, the European is weaker with Florence. It weakens it earlier on in its life cycle. I'll go back to the European model. Weakens Florence earlier on in its life cycle, right about here, which is later this week on Thursday. As a result, it keeps Florence a little further south. Can't penetrate this ridge as much as the GFS wants Florence to do, with Florence being stronger, and therefore keeping Florence further to the south. Florence stays disconnected from this trough to the north too much, does not get picked up, while the GFS is stronger with Florence to northeast, gets picked up by the trough and moves to the northeast as Florence is a little stronger, is able to penetrate that ridge a little bit. So tempted to side with the European. The European is pretty accurate on strength and traction tropical cyclones, and it's just that little difference in strength which could be tied to the difference in how the models are forecasting wind shear and sea surface temperatures, and GFS is not as good at that over this approximately this region of the Atlantic, where the European will weaken it and move Florence further south. GFS will strengthen, or keep Florence strong, move it to the north, and think the GFS is just too strong with Florence and is just overestimates how much it can move north. So I say watch out for Florence, southeast United States, East Coast, North Carolina, possibly even Mid-Atlantic, but down, possible even all the way down to Florida. If Florence weakens here in a few days, that's an indication that the southeast United States needs to watch out for Florence, because once it gets past here and gets over the over the Gulf Stream here, Florence can very strengthen, as what the European is suggesting, head toward anywhere from Florida up to the Mid-Atlantic. So something definitely to watch for tropical storm or Hurricane Florence later down the road in about 10 days, a week to 10 days, sometime next week. If GFS is right and Florence does maintain its strength, then it might curve out, but I'm starting to lean toward the southern solution as it goes toward the Gulf Coast, so something to watch for. Finally, I'll show you this. These are ensemble forecasts. I've shown you this before. I'll show you Gordon real quick. From the European ensembles, the track of Gordon is really nothing. There's really no much discrepancy here. It's just a matter of I'll use red because all these are blue. Where exactly Gordon will make landfall, but it'll make landfall somewhere between southeast Louisiana and Mississippi, Alabama, western Alabama coast, and then curve northward. My arrows are really bad here, and all these models agree on these models and these ensembles agree on the track of Gordon. That's not an issue. It's the track of Florence now. And just looking at these first two images, you can see the difference. These are the GFS ensemble members. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. These are the GFS ensemble members on the right, curving Florence out to sea on the GFS model as they maintain Florence a little stronger, able to penetrate that ridge and be picked up by this trough to the north. European model, European ensembles, actually all over the place. Some European ensembles do that, and then some take it toward the Carolina coast or even toward Florida. So not many do it in the middle, but there are some that curve in the middle. So basically, we're looking at either this way or this way, and it depends a lot on how strong Florence is in a few days, and thus how much wind shear and sea surface temperatures are in approximately that region. So that'll determine whether it'll help determine whether Florence goes south or north. That's just the short-term version of the European ensemble. So a lot of difference, especially in European ensembles, but European model a lot of them want to keep it south. A lot of them recurve it too on the European model, European ensemble. So we still are kind of unsure as to what's going to happen, but there are some things acting against Florence's strength in the next few days, so we're something to watch closely. So keep tuned, and then we'll also be watching Helene and Isaac in the coming days, whether they form, one or both of those form this week, and waves coming off Africa. And the strength of that ridge could determine where those go as well. So we'll keep an eye on those as well. So for today, that's it, and we'll talk about more later. Have a great rest of your day.